Hello there, everybody. I hope you've all had a wonderful work week. So, it's the third quarter. Do you know where your growth is coming from yet? I mean, as marketers around the world panic and realize there are less than 180 days left, wait a minute, is that right? 180 days? Well, let's be honest. It's more like, let's see. Nobody really works or does anything from December 20th onward. And if we're really honest, December itself is kind of a wash. And, well, so is the end of November. The American Thanksgiving is at the end of the month. Nobody really works that week. So, let's see. Basically, let's do the counting here. Let me check my calculator. Let's see. Carry the 1 times 4 times the square root of Monday. And that equals, it's 133 days. 133 days to get all of our marketing goals reached. So how's it going? As it turns out, optimizing our content for search, it's one of the things that is really disrupting content and marketing teams these days. It's been a real disheartening year for those who rely on organic traffic driven out of search, from new algorithms to leaked documents, false starts, imperfect paths, AI search now taking over Google. It's been a bit of a jumbled mess for organic search optimization. So let's start our third quarter with a bit of insight on what's going on with, zero-click search. SparkToro, the wonderful SEO sort of expert, has just released their 2024 zero-click research study, and the results are fascinating. You might be surprised at just how much traffic isn't getting generated by search these days. You want to know a little more? Let's crack open Google and search it. This is a few minutes of what's new in marketing that might help you lead your business's strategy. Let's roll. Hello, everybody. Robert Rose here with What's New in Marketing. It is about what's new in marketing, but most importantly, it's something important in marketing that we think may help you become a better leader. And if we can help you or your team with content marketing services, including custom training, consultation, ongoing implementation of your content marketing approach, get on over to contentmarketinginstitute.com, fill out that form. Let's have a talk about it. So just before the holiday, SparkToro, they released a new study on zero-click search. Now, for those of you who aren't necessarily aware of zero-click, that's basically where somebody, your customer or you do a search for a particular query on a search engine, again, typically Google, but also Bing or others platforms, and you get an answer. And whether it's the best or right or even remotely accurate answer is a separate question, and we'll get to that. But basically, there's an answer right there on the search results page, and then it doesn't actually result in a click to a website, anything. In other words, it satisfies the query without the user having to click through to visit the site to get the information. A common one is what's the address of the White House? Instead of clicking through to whitehouse.gov, you'd simply see that the answer is provided in the search results page as 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing goes for how many pints in a quart or what is content marketing. So Rand Fishkin and his team over at SparkToro have released their 2024 zero-click study, and it looks at what they call a multi-million device clickstream panel. Basically an examination of millions and millions and millions of Google searches all over the world. Now, for this particular study, they didn't really look at keywords, which wouldn't have been terribly helpful anyway, but rather what happens after Americans and Europeans search. What do they do? So what did they find? The first thing is that zero-click, it's become a very meaningful thing. And in fact, they found that more than a third, 37% in fact, that's the end of it. The session ends right there. But what about the other 60-ish% of searches? 21% of all of those searches generate yet another search. And 41% of those searches, go to a click of something. And that's further broken out into 70% of those go to an organic result, 28.5% go to yet another alphabet property, in other words, YouTube or maps or images or news, and 1%, a whole whopping 1%, and that's a right number, goes to a paid ad. Now, there's some nuance to all of that Rand speaks to in his post about mobile search and voice search, but generally speaking, these numbers are really quite interesting. So one of the most interesting findings is that you can see almost 30% of the clicks go to another Google property, where they can be monetized further, of course, with ads and other things. The net of all that is, and this is the real punchline, of every 1,000 US Google searches, only 360 go to the open web. In other words, another website that we might manage. The other punchline to me is that only 37% end with the search query, meaning the answer they got was at least satisfying or perhaps frustrating enough to stop searching then and there. 21% resulted in another search, meaning it was almost assuredly not the right, best, or satisfying answer, and resulted in another roll of the dice in Google's answer casino, and yet another set of off-ramps for what? Google monetization. Now, this study doesn't explicitly answer this, but one would have to assume, at least for the moment, that of those second or third or fourth searches, when we don't get the satisfying answer, of those 21%, well, that there are similar percentages for ending there versus going off to another Google property or to the open web. So the total going off to other Google properties and not your website is probably even higher than being reported here. The research does ultimately conclude that Google is in fact not actually losing in search, despite what many seem to be reporting in the mainstream media these days. And in fact, they are being so successful in translating to more searches with ever more avenues to keep users in the Google ecosystem. They're doing very, very, very well, and their quarterly results certainly reflect that. So what's the takeaway from all this? Well, Rand and SparkToro basically come away with the main takeaway that AI overviews, the quality of Google search results, and all of that failing in some sort of big way, kind of an overreaction by all of us in the sort of pundit world. And I think that's true. What it also speaks to is that from an overall search perspective, one can no longer think of Google search results as simply a silo to search approach to our marketing. In other words, in a perfect world, and yeah, I know it's not a perfect world and all of this isn't going to be exactly right. In a perfect world, what we would do is have matching content to appear on YouTube, news, web search, maps for everything that would be searched for within our relative domain. In other words, if you only look at it from a search perspective, there's every reason to make sure that every blog post you create also has a video to it. It's also got social media distribution. It also has news items associated with it, and so on and so forth. So the bigger learning here is that as marketers, we have to look at the entire ecosystem of Google to understand where we're going to have the best chance of being the preferred off-ramp for people looking for things. Because it's most likely not going to be in that first search to a link to our website or to our blog. We can also take away how to at least start to philosophically approach this idea of zero-click search, which is, well, it's complex. But the simplest way to think about it, without getting into the technical aspects of SEO, is how do we sort to model our content so that we are the answer that Google uses for a particular query, or any platform for that matter. In other words, we start optimizing our content to be seen and answer questions rather than to flow through to a link and hiding that answer. And I can tell you from experience that there's a benefit there. For a few years, when you searched for what is content marketing, well, a CMI page was the answer to that question. In the years since, Google has changed that. CMI is still the #1 organic answer for that query, but they've now replaced the answer with a dictionary box, which in this particular instance shows a third-party definition that, in my humble opinion, isn't quite right. But it is what it is, and it is now decreasing our traffic to that other page. Ultimately, we all have to understand that the game here is rigged, and it's not rigged in our favor. Google is optimizing for Google, not for you or your website. And we can't hate this game because we have to play it. And the answer is how to play is getting really complex. But what we can take solace is in the fact that the trend does seem to be rewarding good, high-quality, informative content. And that's what we're all creating, right? You know, for the remainder of the 133 days and now 6 minutes-ish or so that you've got left in this year. And that, well, that's a few minutes of what's new in marketing. Remember, it's your story to tell. Figure out how to make it a zero-click answer and make it the answer for Google, and then tell it well. I'll see you next week.